Hey, what is up guys? Welcome back to another video, and in this video we're going to be continuing on with our Swift programming tutorial series, and in this particular tutorial we are going to be taking a look at loops and ranges in Swift. Now, what are loops? Well, loops are an efficient way of being able to repeat specific blocks of code. Without loops, you would have to write the same code over and over and over and over again for however many times you need to repeat yourself. And if you need to repeat yourself a dynamic amount of times, and there's no like concrete amount, then then if you don't use a loop, there's really no way to do it. So loops are very important in that regard, right? Now, the loops that we're going to take a look at are a little bit different than what you might find in something like C# or Java, but at least one of them will look familiar to you if you're familiar with those languages. All right? So, the first loop we're going to take a look at is what's called the for loop. Now, we don't have, let's say we go into Xcode. We don't have something like for int I equals 0, I is less than 10, I plus plus. We don't have this type of for loop in Swift like we do in Java or C# or JavaScript. Swift used to have this, but it doesn't. It was removed in Swift 3. Right? So instead of doing it that way, in Swift we use the for in loop, and we use ranges. A little bit more concise syntax that way. So how exactly do we do this then? Well, let's say we want to loop through a bunch of numbers from 0 to 10. Well, there are two different ways we can do this. We can do this exclusively or inclusively. All right? So, in Xcode, we're going to type for, the keyword for, F-O-R, and then after the for keyword, we're going to define the name for a variable that we want to use. And if you don't want to use a variable, or you don't need one, you can do an underscore. But in this case, we're going to use one, so we're going to call it index, let's say. In, so the keyword in, in. And then here's where we provide the range. Now, there are two different kinds of ranges. There is a range where you can include the number on the right-hand side of the range operator that you're using. And then there's one where you don't include it. Right? So let's say we want to go from 0 to 9 and exclude 10. That will be 0, period, less than 10. Like that. Alright? And so what this is going to do is it's going to loop through 0 through 10 and say, okay, stop at 9, because 9 is going to be less than 10, hence why we have a less than symbol in there, along with the two periods. So go ahead and print index. Save your code and run it. And now you can see in our console, we get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. But we don't get 10. All right. What if we want to include 10, however? Well, for that, we can say 3 periods instead of 2 periods and a less than. So like this. So 0, dot, 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 10. If we save this and run it, you can see now we get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 in the console. Because we are including 10 in our range. Pretty simple stuff. I'm not going to go too in-depth into ranges. There are... you can read the documentation for yourself to go more in-depth into ranges. You just need to know this little bit about ranges that I've showed you for loops and stuff like that. There are specific scenarios where you might need to use ranges for more complex tasks, and again, I would urge you to read the documentation so you can understand a little bit better about those scenarios and the different use cases for them. After all, my philosophy is the best way to learn is learn from multiple resources and practice what you learn. All right? So, let's get rid of this for loop. The next thing we're going to take a look at is the while loop. Now, this is a loop where it says do something while the provided condition is still true. These can be a little bit tricky, though, and I'll tell you why. The reason why while loops can be a little bit tricky is because if you're not careful, you could create an infinite loop. And let's simulate that infinite loop here. All right, so we can say while, so the while keyword, and let's say true. And we're gonna do nothing in this loop. Okay, we're gonna do nothing. We're gonna run this code. Now, this code is never going to stop running because true is, well, true. And a while loop runs through its contents while the condition is true. So if we go up to our toolbar, we can hit stop. There we go. All right. So let's go back in here. All right. So let's get rid of this while true loop. Let's get rid of this endless loop here. Let's say we have a var called x, and we set it to an initial value of 1. All right. Let's create a while loop that will continually double the number. It'll keep doubling x until a specific condition is met. So to do that, we can say while, and here we need to provide it a condition. So while x is, let's say, less than or equal to, let's say 10,000. All right. Inside of the body, we're going to say x is equal to x times 2. And here's yet another sort of place where you could create an infinite loop. And that is if you do not do anything to progress towards your condition being true. It will always run. It will never be it'll never be false, right? Or rather, yeah, so it'll never be false, the condition, so the loop will never end. If we just didn't do x equals x times 2, and we said print something, like we say print x, because we don't change x, the condition will always be true, therefore it will never end. But let's uncomment that. Right, and let's go ahead and after we get the value of x multiplied by 2, we will print x like that. Save it and run our code now. And you can see down there in our console, we are printing out every single value of x up until we reach a value that is eventually greater than 10,000 or equal to 10,000. All right. So if it's greater than 10,000, it stops. It doesn't execute the code anymore. Pretty simple. And let's get rid of these, okay? So now there is there's another type of loop that expands on the while loop, but it's a little bit different. We call this the repeat while loop in Swift. This type of loop is what we call a post-test loop in the programming space, in the development world. And what a post-test loop does is it runs the code inside of your loop at least once and then tests to see if the condition is met. Whereas something like a while loop tests to see if the condition is true before running everything inside of the loop. So with a while loop, if the condition is false right out of the gate, it won't run the code at all. But with a repeat while loop, it will always run the code once. And once that code is run, then it tests to see if the condition is met for any additional loop-throughs of the code. So let's go ahead and create a variable. We'll call this x again. All right, and we'll say x is equal to let's say it's equal to 3. So var x is equal to 3. To create this repeat while loop now, we can say repeats, open and closing curly brackets. Inside of those curly brackets, we need to give the body of our loop. And to do that, let's say we want to triple the number. So x equals x times 3. And then after our closing brace, we can say while, and then we need to provide it a condition. So let's say x is less than 300. All right. Let's save that and print x. Let's save it. And we can now, again, make sure everything's saved and run our code. And we have build succeeded. And now we looped through once, right? And then it tested, and because it says, oh, well, 3 times 3 is 9, so that's less than 300, keep going. And so on and so forth, until the condition was greater than or equal to 300. Then it stopped. And so that pretty much, that's the repeat while loop. And those are all the different kinds of loops in Swift. I urge you to go out and try this stuff out on your own. Take the examples I gave you, expand upon them, think of your own scenarios where you might use them. Read the documentation as well to get an even firmer understanding of the concept. And yeah, that pretty much does it for this video, guys. Thank you all so very much for watching, and we will see you in the next one.